The night over southern Laos pressed down like wet ink, smothering even the mountains. Only a thin, cold sliver of moon scraped silver along the Annamite peaks. At 21:47 hours, an AC-130A Spectre, callsign Prometheus 16, banked into its orbit at 7,000 feet, 4 engines humming with the calm confidence of something that knew the dark belonged to it. In the sensor bay, SSgt William Hartley bent over his IR scope, face painted green by the glow. At first it had been nothing, just another faint smear of heat along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, one more ghost among the thousands they'd watched over the years. But the smear brightened, dimmed, then brightened again, rhythmically, as if something large and metal was moving under a thin skin of jungle. "Contact, possible vehicle, grid coming," Hartley murmured. Up front, Aircraft Commander Maj. Leonard, Corbett listened, eyes shifting between instruments and the black window beyond. This was his second tour. He knew what Hartley's voice sounded like when it was a truck, a generator, a road crew. Tonight, it carried a different kind of focus. By early 1972, the war in the air was changing. American planners were preparing for heavier campaigns. North Vietnamese commanders were doing the same. MiG-21s and MiG-17s were being slipped down from the north, like knives in the dark, wings removed, fuselages hauled on trailers, camouflaged under triple canopy near the Laos-Vietnam border. Intelligence believed it, proving it was another matter. The AC-130s had been built to butcher trucks, but their sensors, infrared, low-light TV, side-looking radar, made them the only aircraft with eyes sharp enough to hunt fighters on the ground. "Target stopped moving," Hartley said. "Second heat source just popped, smaller, forward of the first. Looks like a generator, maybe tow support." The aircraft eased into a tighter left-hand turn, the classic gunship orbit. Side, red cabin lights gave every face the same tired, hollow look. The navigator hunched over charts, the flight engineer watching needles for the slightest wrong twitch. The electronic warfare officer, EWO, listening to the invisible hiss of enemy radars. No friendly aircraft nearby, no ground troops. If they went down, the wreck wouldn't be found until morning, if at all. "Let's get a clean look," Corbett said. "Keep the radios quiet unless we have to talk." Below was nothing but black to the naked eye. In Hartley's scope, it was a different world. Heat pulses under trees, narrow ribbons where truck exhaust had warmed the air, a few embers from campfires hastily stamped out. The first contact had stopped in a small clearing, its heat signature steady now. A second bloom, hotter, more concentrated, flared to one side. Then something else emerged. Against the cooler background of earth and foliage, a longer, colder mass lay in the clearing. It wasn't bright enough to be an engine. It was the absence of heat, a sleek shape soaking up the glow of the generator cart beside it. Hartley felt his throat tighten. "Sir, I've got an elongated fuselage, wings off, tail low in the trees. This looks like an aircraft, not a truck." The fire control officer leaned closer to the monitor. Dimensions, angles, curves. This was no flatbed, no shelter roof. It had the proportions of a MiG fuselage stripped for transport. Corbett's jaw flexed once. The chance to find a MiG on the ground, in transit, under jungle cover, was the sort of opportunity that could shift an entire sector's air picture. It could also be bait. The NVA had been learning the price of ignoring AC-130s since Tet. Heavy machine guns, 12, 7mm, 23mm, even 30 Samban-me, had crept deeper into Laos each season, dragged piece by piece along goat trails and logging tracks. Convoys moved only with LAA near at hand, and word had spread among North Vietnamese pilots. The Americans had a gunship that circled all night, that saw through leaves, that could turn any stretch of road into a killing ground. Some called it the Dragon with Burning Eyes. "EWO, give me what you've got," Corbett said. "Faint emissions, east of target," the EWO replied. "Pattern looks like radar-assisted 23mm. They're waking something up." The gunners checked their weapons. 20mm Vulcans loaded, 40mm Bofors ready. Shells clinked softly as they settled in their boxes. The hull smelled like warm metal, hydraulic fluid, coffee and sweat that had nowhere to go. "Engage tow and generator first," Corbett ordered. "Leave the fuselage intact until we're sure. We want proof, not just a bonfire." The AC-130 dipped a little, settling into a firing solution that kept it high enough to survive, low enough to kill. "Guns hot," the fire control officer said. The night tore open. The first 20mm burst stitched across the clearing in Hartley's view, bright points of light slashing through branches and canvas. The tow vehicle erupted in sparks, then flame. Men scattered, heat signatures sprinting in every direction. A second burst walked across the generator cart. A moment later, the screen flared white as fuel went up. Below, crews who had trusted jungle and darkness to protect them now found themselves standing in a pool of light. The reaction was immediate. A 23mm sight to the east snapped alive, tracer lines spearing upward in wild arcs. To the naked eye in the cockpit, the sky stayed black. Only when rounds passed close did the crew feel the shiver of air being punched aside, hear the distant thump of exploding shells. "Radar spike, East Ridge," the EWO called. "They've got us painted." "Adjust orbit. Keep that sight in the cone," Corbett said calmly. 40 mils, engage." The Bofors guns spoke. Each shot shook the airframe with a heavy, rhythmic kick. On the IR screen, trees around the gun pit exploded into bright shrapnel. For a moment, the 23mm continued firing, then its signature vanished in a hot smear. "Sight suppressed," the EWO confirmed. "Spike gone." But the clearing was now a battlefield, and the enemy was very much awake. "Fuselage still intact," Hartley said quietly, "and they're starting to drag it." Somewhere down there, NVAF technicians and soldiers were scrambling to save a prize they had believed hidden, now trapped under the stare of something they'd only heard about in rumors. The American Dragon had found them. The AC-130 tightened its orbit, left wing dipped like a hawk, turning a circle over prey that refused to stay down. Fires in the clearing flickered and spat, casting pulsing heat that distorted Hartley's view. The MiG fuselage lay half-exposed now, one side glowing a little hotter where nearby flames licked at its skin. Figures ducked in and out of the light, some dragging hoses, others trying to pull camo nets back over the aircraft, as if hiding it could make the gunship forget. "Confirmed dimensions," Corbett said. The fire control officer rattled them off. Length, approximate diameter, tail height, comparing them to what intelligence briefings had drilled into their heads. "It's a fish bed," he concluded. "MiG-21. No question from this angle." Finding a MiG-21 in a jungle clearing wasn't supposed to be possible. On both sides of the war, fighters belonged on concrete. Taxiways, revetments, hardened shelters. Here, deep in Laos, this one lay naked on dirt, mid-relocation, far from any runway, and yet surrounded by more guns than many frontline positions. Below, NVA gunners were still adjusting to the shock. Some had already died in the first Bofors strikes. Others scrambled to man backup positions laid out in a defensive ring. In their training lectures, they'd been told American gunships were slow and predictable, easy to trap if you layered enough the delay. Tonight would test those lectures brutally. "New emissions north," the EWO reported. "Different frequency. Could be a 37mm radar. A 37mm battery could throw shells high enough to reach them even at altitude. The jungle might be black, but its teeth were very real." "Okay," Corbett said. "We've stirred up the nest. Time to take some stingers out." Prometheus 16 slid slightly outward, adjusting its orbit. The Bofors thundered again, shots walking along the ridge to the north, tearing open pockets of heat that flared and then disappeared. The IR showed trees toppling like matchsticks, bright and brief. "Radar spike fading," the EWO said. "They're either hit or masking." Hartley never took his eyes off the clearing. The tow vehicle burned hot. The generator cart was a bright wound. The MiG lay in the middle of it all, like some animal struggling to stay hidden while the forest around it caught fire. NVA personnel tried something different now. A cluster of heat signatures moved along the clearing's edge, dragging long shapes from under camo netting. Hartley zoomed in. "Rockets," he said. "RPGs, they're trying to shoot at us." Everyone in the cabin knew how slim the odds were. A shoulder-fired grenade reaching an AC-130 at several thousand feet was unlikely. But desperation did strange things. 20 mils, short-controlled bursts, clean them off the perimeter, Corbett ordered. The Vulcans spat again. On script, the IR showed men diving for cover, rockets scattered and detonating prematurely. One blast lit up the MiG's tail, confirming its distinctive fin shape as it flared bright, then faded. In the clearing, panic warred with discipline. Some technicians tried once more to cover the fighter. Others broke and fled, sprinting into the jungle's relative safety. A cadre of ADLA crews stayed, hands on elevation wheels, faces turned upward toward a target they still could not see. High above, the EWO stiffened. New spike, strong, tight, from the south. That's not 23 or 37. Pattern looks like a guidance radar or missile support. Hartley's IR confirmed a small, intense heat bloom suddenly flaring on the southern slope. It rose fast, like a vertical streak of fire. "Launch!" someone shouted. "Missile launch!" Corbett didn't waste breath swearing. "Break orbit! Climb! Flares! Now!" Flares poured from the gunship's belly in a shower of brilliant heat, each one a decoy brighter than the engines themselves. Prometheus 16 clawed upward, engines straining, the whole aircraft shuddering as it bit into thinner air. Hartley watched the missile rise in his scope, a slim, deadly heat plume curving up toward them, then bending, drawn off by the cloud of flares, spiraling uselessly until it burned out. "Missile lost lock," the EWO said. "Heat seeker, probably SA-7 type. They've got Strela down there." For a few seconds, nobody spoke. The airframe's creaks and the steady roar of the engines filled the spaces where adrenaline had been. They all knew what a hit from a man-portable missile would do to a fat, slow-climbing AC-130. The fact that the jungle below had just thrown one at them changed the mental map of Laos permanently. "Put it in the log," Corbett said quietly. "Man-portable threat confirmed in this sector." Then, after a breath, "We're not done. That MiG doesn't leave this valley. We go back in, controlled. No more gifts for their missile crews." The co-pilot shot him a quick look and nodded. The decision wasn't reckless. It was calculation. One fighter on the ground now could be many encounters in the air later, over South Vietnamese troops, over friendly bases. Killing it here mattered. The navigator plotted a new orbit, just offset enough to break the pattern enemy gunners were beginning to anticipate, just tight enough for the guns to still do their work. On the ground, shaken NVA technicians regrouped under shouted orders. The MiG had been meant to slip invisibly along a route no American pilot would ever see. Instead, it lay under the worst kind of spotlight. Commanders snapped at each other, gesturing toward the sky, toward the burning tow vehicles, toward their prized fighter now scarred and exposed. Somewhere in that chaos, a decision hardened. The MiG would not be abandoned. If they couldn't move it, they'd at least make the Americans pay for every second they spent overhead. The jungle adjusted, guns shifted, men took positions. What had begun as a relocation had become a duel between one aircraft in the sky and one on the ground, with dozens of lives orbiting around both. Prometheus 16 rolled gently back toward the clearing, left wing low, as if the night itself were converging on that single patch of burning forest. The next pass felt different. Up to this point, every orbit had been an opening move, a test. Now they were down to the heart of it. Either they would destroy the MiG or leave it to be flown against them another day. The room for half measures had vanished. "Fuel check," the co-pilot said. "We've got enough for the run and a safe climb out, but we're cutting into our margin." "Understood," Corbett replied. "This is our last full engagement window. We make it count." "Me?" The AC-130 slid back into a shallower altitude, just enough to bring the clearing into the sweet spot for the guns without handing the AA crews a stationary target. The Bofors barrels still ticked with residual heat. The 20mm housings glowed faintly in the dim cabin light. The EWO scanned. No new radar locks yet. Eastern 37mm is quiet. Western sights still suppressed. Southern missile position is cold. "Nobody relax," Corbett said. "They're not done." Hartley refocused on the clearing. Smoke lay in thin layers, drifting sideways on a barely noticeable breeze. Through it, the MiG's fuselage shone in crisp outline now, one side newly scorched, the canopy crushed flat under a fallen branch, the tail still defiantly upright. Movement along the northeast edge caught his eye. "New vehicle, tracked, moving in," he said. "Looks like armor." The fire control officer narrowed his eyes. Even blurred by heat, the low, squat profile was familiar. PT-76 or ASU-57, something in that family. Light, but with a gun that can reach up a bit if they're bold. "They're bringing everything they've got," the co-pilot muttered. 40 mils. Priority on that armor," Corbett ordered. "We don't let them turn a cannon on us." The Bofors answered with cold enthusiasm. Shells pounded the northeast fringe, each impact blossoming into white heat. The vehicle lurched, tried to reverse, then froze. For a moment, its interior glowed brighter than the hull as ammunition cooked off. Flames punched through hatches and vents. The heat signature spiked and then settled into the steady burn of a dead machine. "Tracked vehicle neutralized," Hartley confirmed. On the ground, the effect was psychological as much as physical. The armored escort was supposed to be assurance, a last resort. Watching it explode under invisible fire stripped away another layer of confidence from the NVA crews. In the middle of the clearing, the MiG wasn't moving anymore. Whoever had been trying to salvage it seemed to have given up on dragging and focused instead on survival. A few silhouettes still clung to the fuselage, as if proximity to the fighter might somehow protect them. "Target looks static now," Hartley said. "No tow activity, no one close enough to risk hitting friendlies." Corbett made the call he'd been working toward all night. "All stations, final strike on the fuselage. We're done playing around it. Full resolution, precise fire. After that, we leave." No one argued. The AC-130 settled into a nearly perfect geometry. Speed, altitude, bank angle, all aligned. The navigator fed real-time wind corrections. The flight engineer kept engines balanced, avoiding the slightest slip that might throw off the gun solution. "Target locked," the fire control officer said, voice unusually quiet. The first volley of 40mm slammed into the MiG's aft section. On IR, the impact spilled white heat along the fuselage's spine. Metal deformed, crumpling inward. A second shell hit nearer the center, tearing open the top and spilling debris. Hartley watched, strangely detached, as the fighter came apart. All the mystique of a MiG-21, the speed, the kill ratios, the fear it inspired in F-4 crews, meant nothing when it lay pinned to the ground under the crosshairs of an orbiting gunship. A third shot connected with the fuel system. For a heartbeat, nothing seemed to happen. Then the internal vapors lit off. The clearing became a single, rolling blast of heat and light. Fire burst from seams and panel lines. The nose assembly sheared sideways. The tail snapped and folded, vanishing in a shower of glowing fragments. Bits of wing cradle and transport rigging spun away like leaves in a hurricane. "Fuselage is gone," Hartley said. "It's just wreckage now. No way that ever flies." The AC-130's cabin filled with a low chorus of exhalations. No cheers, no whoops. Just breaths that had been held too long, finally released. The night refused to grant them even 10 seconds of satisfaction. "Radar spike east," the EWO shouted. "Strong! That 37mm battery's awake and angry." Tracers rose a moment later. Fat, bright streaks ripping through the sky ahead and behind them. The crew couldn't see the bursts, not clearly, but they felt them, percussive thumps in the air, ripples in the hull. "Climb now," Corbett ordered. Flares! Break out of the orbit. Flares poured again in radiant fountains. Prometheus 16 clawed for altitude, changing heading just enough to complicate the gunner's pattern solving. The flight engineer called engine temps, caution in his voice. The co-pilot kept his hands steady. Too harsh a movement could stall an engine, too soft could invite a direct hit. Another radar emission bloomed, this time from the south. The jungle had more guns still in reserve. A second 23mm sight opened fire blindly into the dark, tracers weaving upward to intersect where they believed the orbit would be. "We're bracketed," the navigator said tightly. "East and south." Corbett did something that would have gotten another man grounded if it failed. "Hard right bank. Descend 10%. Use the ridge as cover." The gunship rolled into a steeper turn than doctrine liked, hull complaining with long metallic groans. G-forces pressed the crew into their harnesses, shifted their stomachs. Outside, the shape of the ridge swelled in the black. For a moment, it felt like they were diving into the mountain. Then, the turn completed. The ridge slid between them and the eastern gun pit, a wedge of rock absorbing the invisible arcs of flak. Southern tracers streaked past behind them, guessing at a position the AC-130 no longer occupied. "Spikes dropping," the EWO said, relief leaking into his tone. "They lost us in the terrain." Prometheus 16 leveled out at a safer altitude, nose pointed south toward friendlier sky. "Check systems," Corbett said. "All of them." Quick reports came back. No major damage, no fires, no depressurization. The airframe had taken the night's punishment and stayed in one piece. The MiG had not. Behind them, the clearing burned like a wound. Crews, some dead, some stunned. Man-portable missile teams, terrified technicians, all of them stood watching the sky where the Dragon had been, ears ringing, lungs full of smoke. Down there, myths were forming. Up here, men just wanted coffee and silence. Dawn found Prometheus 16 crossing the last ridgelines of Laos, the eastern horizon bruised violet and orange. Fatigue settled into the cabin like another crew member. Heavy, quiet, and in no hurry to leave. Chatter on the intercom thinned to essentials. The hum of the engines became less a sound and more a background condition of existence. Men loosened harnesses a notch, rolled aching shoulders, wiped dried sweat from their eyes. Hartley leaned back from his scope for the first time in what felt like days. Every time he blinked, he still saw after-images. The glowing skeleton of the MiG, the burst of the missile, the writhing patterns of men trying to salvage metal under a sky that hated them. Sensor operators were trained to detach, to see only signatures, not souls. Nights like this made that harder. The gunship touched down at Ubon as the sky finally turned a pale, indifferent blue. From the outside, Prometheus 16 looked intact, if a bit battered. Scorch marks near one nacelle, a few shallow dents where near-miss fragments had kissed the skin. Nothing that shouted how close they'd come. Inside the debriefing hut, the night replayed in granular detail. Footage from the IR and low-light cameras showed the sequence step by step, the first glimpse of the heat bloom on the trail, the revelation of the MiG fuselage, the ATA sights waking like angry hornets, the missile's bright ascent, the armored vehicle's brief, doomed appearance, the final destruction of the fighter, the chaotic curtain of flak as the gunship escaped. Intelligence officers moved frame by frame, sometimes back and forth, comparing outlines and measurements. The conclusion was unambiguous. MiG-21, in transit, deep in Laos, protected by a network of guns and at least one man-portable missile team. Destroying a MiG in the air made headlines and kill marks on a jet's fuselage. Destroying one in the jungle before it could ever take off rarely made it past classified briefings. But the impact on planning was real. In the weeks that followed, intercepts revealed argument and anxiety among North Vietnamese relocation units. Some blamed local air defense commanders for not positioning the guns more cleverly. Others accused the jungle itself of betrayal. One phrase kept appearing in reports: The American Dragon sees through the leaves. For NVAF pilots, the story took on a different weight. Fighting F-4s and F-105s in the sky was expected risk. Losing a fighter on the ground, hidden under triple canopy because some orbiting gunship found it in the middle of Laos, that undermined their faith in night and distance. A former MiG pilot years later would describe the mood in his regiment. We thought the jungle and the dark belonged to us. Then we heard that one of our aircraft had been found and destroyed far from any airfield. The younger pilots began to say there was an American plane that could see us even when we were sleeping. We laughed at them at first. On the American side, the sortie became part of AC-130 lore. Not the loud barroom variety, but the quieter kind told in dim mission rooms and simulator briefings. In those retellings, the MiG sometimes grew larger, the defenses thicker, the missile closer. That's what memory does. But the core remained. One Spectre gunship had stalked a fighter along the Ho Chi Minh Trail, dismantled its protective ring, and killed it before it ever reached a runway. Majun's Len Corbett rotated home with medals and the same steady, slightly distant gaze he'd always had. When asked about that night, he tended to shrug. "We did our job," he'd say. "So did the guys trying to shoot us down. The MiG was just caught in the middle of who got the better of the dark that night." Hartley finished his tour months later. He trained new sensor operators, pointing to still frames from that engagement as he talked them through what to look for when the jungle tried to lie. "Don't just stare at the hot stuff," he'd tell them. "Look for the cold shapes where they don't belong. The big pieces of metal that aren't supposed to be there, that's where the story is." For the NVA troops who survived the clearing, the story lived in a different shadow. Some would later write about a night when the sky turned into a circling predator. One ground crewman, interviewed long after the war, remembered the feeling as the AC-130's orbit tightened. "We were not afraid of the dark anymore. We were afraid of what was in the dark. You could not shoot at what you could not see, but it could see you. That is not a fair fight, but war is not fair." History would not pause for one destroyed fighter. In 1972, linebacker would come. SAM belts would thicken around Hanoi. MiGs would rise and fall in dozens of dogfights. AC-130s would continue to haunt the trails, some never coming home. Prometheus 16 flew other missions. The war did not end because of one night in Laos. But along a narrow, muddy artery of the Ho Chi Minh Trail, the balance of fear shifted a little. The NVA learned that even under triple canopy, moving their most prized aircraft carried new risks. American planners learned that the Spectre could do more than cut trucks apart, that it could reach into the enemy's air arm itself, and the men who'd been inside that dim red cabin learned something too, that the line between hunter and hunted in the dark is razor thin, that a single missile plume or radar spike can turn predator into target in a heartbeat. That courage on a gunship is measured less by bravado and more by the quiet way hands keep working consoles when tracers climb too near. If you're imagining that night now, the circling gunship, the burning clearing, the MiG dying without ever leaving the ground, you're touching the edge of what those crews lived through, night after night. They were not ghosts. They were tired men in a noisy airplane, doing precise, deadly work in a place where the jungle hid more than trees. And for one long, brutal night over southern Laos, their American Dragon found an enemy fighter in the most unlikely of places, and proved that in that war, even the darkness itself could be contested ground.